Apologize right now or get the hell out of my house, my son screamed, his face twisted into a mask of rage I didn't recognize. I gripped the marble countertop until my knuckles turned white, staring at the woman beside him, who was smiling like she had just won a war I didn't even know I was fighting. I never thought the day would come when my own flesh and blood would speak to me with the same tone you use to scold a stranger. I still remember every word, every gesture, every second of that scene that split my life in two. Apologize or leave, Arthur shouted, his eyes overflowing with anger. And there was that woman next to him, looking at me with that frozen, satisfied smile. It all started that afternoon. It was a big house, one of those McMansions filled with expensive trinkets and furniture that looked more like a museum exhibit than a home. I had been living there for 3 years, ever since my arthritis got worse, and Arthur insisted it was better for me to be under his care. But deep down, I knew it wasn't him who wanted it. It was Lauren, his wife, who convinced him. Not out of affection, but because she liked to pretend to be a good, generous woman, capable of housing her sick mother-in-law. That afternoon, while I was cleaning the kitchen, I moved the crystal china she guarded as if they were holy relics. I just wanted to get a tablecloth out, but one of the plates slipped and fell. The sound of glass shattering still haunts my dreams. Lauren appeared like a lightning bolt. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like whips. "What did you do?" she said to me, her voice low but loaded with venom. "It was an accident, Lauren. I am so sorry. I can replace it." She let out a short, dry laugh. "Replace it?" she repeated. "With what? With your ridiculous Social Security check?" Arthur walked in seconds later. She ran to him, faking tears. "Your mother broke one of the plates from the Italian set, the one your boss gave us." And he, without even looking at the floor, looked at me. "Mom, how could you?" I felt a knot in my throat. "It was an accident, son." Lauren interrupted him with feigned sweetness. "It's okay, honey. It would just be nice if she apologized. That way we are all at peace. Just an apology." That word drilled into my ears. Apologies. Apologies for cleaning, for helping, for living. "I have nothing to apologize for," I said, firm. And right there, in that instant, I saw something break inside my son. His eyes changed. They filled with pride, with secondhand embarrassment, with that absurd need to look good in front of his wife. Then he shouted, "Apologize or get out of my house." The silence after those words was crueler than the scream. I didn't say anything. I just took off my apron, gathered my few things, and walked toward the door. Lauren looked at me with that smile of someone who thinks they have won a war they don't understand. I walked out into the rain, and every drop that fell on my face reminded me of what I had always feared, that I had raised a man, but not a son. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching us from. Now let's continue. That night I had nowhere to go. I took a bus toward my old house, the one I had left empty when I moved in with Arthur. The ride was long, the seat was hard, the air was cold, and my tears were warm. Nobody looked at me. Nobody suspected that in that corner sat a woman who had just lost the only thing she thought she had, her family. You know, there is a specific kind of cold that settles in your bones when you realize you are homeless, not because you lack a roof, but because you lack a heart to shelter you. It is a cold that no coat can fix. When I arrived, the neighborhood lights were off. The house looked the same, just sadder. The blinds were broken. The walls were damp. The clock had stopped. I opened the door with the same key as always, the one I kept out of habit, not hope. And when I crossed the threshold, the silence hit me. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the old wooden chair. The air smelled of dust and loneliness. I ran my hand over the table, where the rings from the coffee mugs my husband and I used to share were still visible, and without being able to help it, I began to weep. But it wasn't a cry of weakness. It was a cry of awakening, because I understood that I hadn't just lost a home. I had lost the illusion that someone else would take care of me. And then, Among the shadows, I swore something, that this would be the last time anyone would make me feel less than. The rest of the night was a parade of memories. Arthur as a child, running with shoes full of mud, his laugh when I baked him a cake, his first job, his wedding, the promise he made to never leave me alone. All of that sounded now like a distant echo, someone else's story. I fell asleep on the table, and when I woke up at dawn, with the light coming through the window, I had a strange sensation. For the first time in a long time, I was alone, but at peace. I got up, cleaned the table, made coffee with the leftovers I found, and took a deep breath. The taste was bitter, yes, but it had something different. It tasted like freedom. I didn't know how, but in that moment I knew my life wasn't over. A new chapter had just begun, one I would write with tired hands, yes, but with an awakened heart. And while the sun came through the window, I remembered something my husband always used to say. Evelyn, when you lack strength, don't ask for forgiveness for being strong. Ask for forgiveness for having forgotten yourself. That day I promised myself I would remember me again. When I closed the door that morning, the sound of the deadbolt felt definitive, as if it were sealing a stage of my life. My house, that old structure with worn walls and the smell of ancient wood, received me with the same silence as always, but it no longer seemed hostile. It was the silence of what survives, and in some way, also the silence of what waits. The sun entered through the dining room window, illuminating the dust suspended in the air. Each particle looked like a floating memory. I took off my soaked coat, hung it on the rack, and walked through the rooms. The curtains were still there, pale and withered, as if they had aged with me. In the bedroom, the quilt I embroidered more than 20 years ago still covered the bed. Everything was the same, and at the same time, everything had changed. I sat on the edge of the mattress and breathed deep. Loneliness has a smell that you learn to recognize. It smells like dust, like old papers, like clothes stored for too long. But that morning, for the first time, it didn't scare me. It was my house, my space, my refuge. Perhaps, I thought, freedom also smells like dust and silence. I opened the windows. The fresh air from the street came in like a caress. The sounds of the neighborhood crept back in. The baker on the corner, the kids running, an old radio playing Motown classics from the house across the street. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was still alive. I went to the kitchen. The clock hanging on the wall marked 6 o'clock. Although it hadn't worked for years, I didn't want to change the battery. Sometimes it is better to let time stop where it hurts less. I put water on to boil and made coffee. The aroma wrapped around me with a warm, almost kind melancholy. I sat by the window, and for a moment I imagined my husband, Julian, walking in with his usual smile, and that simple way of speaking that turned any misfortune into a lesson. If one day everything falls apart, Evelyn, he had told me once, rebuild with your hands. Nobody can take away what you know how to do. I remembered him with a tenderness so deep that my chest ached. Sometimes memories are knives that we caress without meaning to. In the afternoon, I went through the things stored in the bedroom closet. Among photos, letters, and forgotten clothes, I found an old wooden trunk. It was heavy, covered in dust, with a rusty lock. On top it had a small metal plate engraved with fine letters, "For when your heart is tired." I stroked it with my fingers. The message made me shudder. That handwriting was Julian's. For an instant, I couldn't move. I had to sit on the floor, in front of that trunk that seemed to hold not just objects, but something deeper, something that had been waiting for me all those years. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I looked for the key everywhere. In drawers, jewelry boxes, pockets of old coats. Nothing. Only the echo of his promise. For when your heart is tired. And I understood that the moment had arrived. My heart wasn't just tired, it was exhausted. The next day I went out to walk around the neighborhood. The streets were still the same, but the faces were different. Some people recognized me. Others just looked at me with that mix of curiosity and pity people have toward older women walking alone. On the corner, I ran into Rose, my neighbor from forever ago. small, with happy eyes and hands that were always busy. When she saw me, she let out a scream. "Evelyn, so many years. I thought you were gone for good." We hugged. Her warmth reminded me that sincere affection still existed, the kind that demands nothing in return. "I came back," I told her with a sad smile. "Life took a big turn, but here I am." Rose invited me to her house for tea. While we talked, I told her, without many details, what had happened with Arthur and Lauren. She listened in silence, shaking her head. "You don't know how much I regret that, my friend," she said finally. "But look at it this way. Now you are free." "Free, yes," I replied, "but alone. Solitude isn't an enemy, Evelyn. It's a teacher." Her words left me thinking. Before saying goodbye, she gave me a basket of homemade bread and an idea. "Why don't you go back to baking sweets? You know, the pies?" "Pies?" "Yes, the ones you made for the neighborhood kids. They were delicious. You could sell them." At first, I laughed, skeptical. But when I went back home and opened my empty pantry, her suggestion seemed more like an opportunity than madness. That night, I slept little. The rain hit the roof and the wind sneaked through the cracks, but between the sound of the water and my thoughts, something started to move inside me. It wasn't sadness. It was a spark, a beginning. I woke up early, lit the oven, and with the little I had, I prepared a batch of sweet apple hand pies. The aroma flooded the house. For the first time in years, the place smelled like life again, and while I kneaded the dough, I felt my hands remembering every movement without effort. These old hands still knew how to create. They still knew how to sustain. I went out to sell them at noon on the corner. Rose accompanied me, insisting that company was a better remedy than silence. We sold everything, and when I returned home, with the coins jingling in my pocket, an emotion I thought I had lost invaded me. Pride. It's funny how a handful of coins can weigh more than a vault of gold when you've earned them with your own sweat. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I existed, that I had value outside of being someone's mother or someone's burden. That night, I opened the trunk again. I still couldn't find the key, but I didn't feel impatient anymore, because something told me that what was kept inside didn't need to be opened yet. Perhaps life knew better when to show us what we are not yet ready to see. I sat on the bed with Julian's portrait in my hands. I spoke to him in a low voice, as if he could still hear me. "I failed you, love. I raised a man who forgot the value of gratitude. But you know, today I sold my pies, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I am still useful for something." The portrait didn't answer, but I could swear his smile became warmer under the dim light. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was his way of telling me he was still with me. I closed my eyes. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It just accompanied me. And while I drifted off to sleep, I thought that maybe life wasn't punishing me, but teaching me to start over, only this time it would be on my own terms. I never imagined that the sound of coins could give me back hope. I listened to them jingle inside an old tin can on the table, and each one of them was the result of my hands, of my hours, of my strength. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in many years, I didn't depend on anyone, not on my son's charity, nor on his wife's fake compassion. Every morning I got up before dawn. I lit the oven, mixed flour, butter, and apples, and the smell of the sweets filled the house with a warmth that made me forget the cold. Rose helped me sell them on the corner. Her granddaughter, Mia, a little girl of barely 8 years old, looked at me with admiration while she tasted the scraps of dough left in the bowl. "Mrs. Evelyn tastes just like the ones my grandma used to make," she said, smiling, and I, without being able to help it, felt my soul soften. The routine, far from tiring me, strengthened me. My body ached, yes, but my heart felt lighter. Every pie sold was a small victory, a way of telling the world I was still standing. Sometimes at night, I opened the window and looked at the city lights in the distance. I thought about Arthur, about how his life would be now, in that cold house where luxury was more important than tenderness. It hurt, of course, but I also understood something. There are loves that only mature when you let them go. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the bedroom, I stumbled upon the old trunk. It was still there, unmovable, like a silent presence. "For when your heart is tired," said the plate. And that phrase resonated inside me again, every time with more strength. I sat in front of it, stroked it with trembling hands, and rested my head on the lid. I felt that somehow Julian was still talking to me from there. It was as if he had left in that trunk not just objects, but a part of his soul. I tried to open it again. Nothing. The padlock remained firm, rusty but solid, and although I knew I could force it, something in me told me I shouldn't do it that way. Julian never gave me things without a purpose. He believed that moments had their right time, their own invisible key. Perhaps the real key wasn't made of metal yet, but of understanding. I sighed, covered it with a cloth, and left it there. But that night I slept restlessly. I dreamed of him. We were in the workshop where we used to work, and he handed me a small, golden key, telling me, "Don't use it out of curiosity, Evelyn. Use it when you are ready to remember who you are." I woke up soaked in tears. The dream had been so real that I had to touch my pockets, as if the key might have been left there. The days went on, the same but different. Rose convinced me to take my pies to the town's farmer's market. "You'll sell everything there, you'll see," she told me. And so I did. With a basket covered in an embroidered cloth, I set up in a corner. The first few hours were slow, but by noon the smell of the apple pies started attracting people. "Do you make them yourself?" "Yes, with my own hands." And that was enough for them to buy. An older lady approached me and said something that stuck with me. "Don't stop doing this, honey. You can tell when something is made with love." That afternoon, I sold everything. I returned home with tired feet, but a full soul. And when I put the coins on the table, I saw the reflection of the trunk in the hallway mirror. For some reason, the sunset light fell right on it, illuminating the metal plate. "For when your heart is tired." I smiled. Maybe Julian knew that, little by little, my heart was ceasing to be tired. Weeks passed. The business grew. Some neighbors started giving me large orders for parties. Even Rose proposed opening a small, permanent stall at the market. "Could we give it a name?" she said. "A name?" I asked, laughing. "Yes. What do you think of Evelyn's Flavor?" I couldn't help but laugh. "I don't know if that sounds like sweets or a scandal," I replied. That laugh was different, clean, one of those that are born from a heart that breathes again. However, that same afternoon, the calm was broken. I was cleaning the kitchen when I heard an engine stop in front of the house. I peeked through the window and saw a black, shiny car. My heart shrank. From it stepped a figure I recognized instantly. Lauren. She came alone. Her tight dress, her expensive perfume, her haughty walk. She knocked on the door without waiting for an answer and walked in. She didn't even give me time to react. "So, here you are," she said, scanning the house with disdain. "What a quaint place." "What are you doing here, Lauren?" I asked with my heart in my throat. "I came to see if you needed anything. Arthur is worried." "Worried?" I repeated with a bitter smile. "He hasn't called me once." "Well," she said, looking at her nails, "we've been busy, business, trips." Her tone was condescending, almost offensive. She didn't come to worry. She came to show me she was still winning. She approached the trunk and looked at it with curiosity. "And this?" "Nothing that interests you." "A souvenir from the past?" she asked, smiling with malice. "How curious that you keep so many old things." I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel fear, only pity. That woman lived surrounded by luxuries, but empty inside. Everything she touched turned into appearance. "Lauren," I told her slowly, "don't bother coming to see me if what you are looking for is to reassure yourself. I already know who I am. You are still trying to figure it out." Her smile vanished. She looked at me with contempt and left without answering. The noise of the car driving away mixed with my agitated breathing, but inside me something changed. My voice hadn't trembled. I hadn't looked down. Dignity isn't a loud shout. It isn't a scene you make in a restaurant. It's a quiet steel rod in your spine that keeps you upright when the wind tries to blow you over. For the first time, I understood that dignity could also be lived in silence. That night, when the sky filled with stars, I sat in front of the trunk again. I rested my palm on the lid and closed my eyes. The metal was cold, but beneath it beat something warm, as if it held life. For when your heart is tired, I read again. And then I knew. That trunk didn't just keep a secret. It kept my destiny. I wouldn't open it yet, but I felt that every day that passed brought me closer to the moment when the key, the real key, would reach my hands. I just had to wait, because life, when it is fair, always returns what is stolen from you. Only it does it in its own time. The sound of the oven filled my mornings again. It was curious how that constant hum, that dry and sweet heat, had become the pulse of my life. Every time I turned it on, it was as if I also turned on something inside me, a spark of dignity, of purpose. Evelyn, the woman who a few months ago was crying in the street with soaked clothes, now had her own small business and a reason to wake up early. Sometimes I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving and thought, look at you, you're still here. Life, although simple, had become kind to me. Rose had become a sister. Her granddaughter, Mia, came every afternoon to help me with the pies and made me laugh with her inexhaustible curiosity. I had even gotten used to writing down large orders in an old notebook where I used to write down the month's expenses. Every line written was a victory against oblivion. One morning, while I was placing the packages on the table, Rose arrived, agitated. "Evelyn, did you hear about Arthur?" she told me in a low voice. "What happened?" "They say his company is going through problems, big problems." I remained silent, not out of morbid curiosity or revenge, but out of the strange mix of surprise and understanding that ran through my body. "Problems?" I asked calmly. "Yes, it seems a major contract fell through, and someone leaked information." She told it like someone revealing a rumor, but her eyes searched mine with caution. "I am not happy about it," I replied, "but it doesn't hurt me either." That afternoon, I didn't turn on the oven. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and let my thoughts walk on their own. Life has a curious way of teaching justice. It never hits where you want, but always where it is needed. And I knew, deep down, that those cracks weren't a coincidence. They were necessary. Days later, I received a call. The number was unknown, but my instinct knew who was on the other side. I answered. "Mom." Arthur's voice was trembling. I hadn't heard it since that night. "Yes, son. I just wanted to know how you are." "Good. Working." "Working?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes, my pies sell well." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. "And you?" I asked. "Everything is fine," he said, but his tone betrayed him. Before hanging up, his voice lowered a bit. "I miss you." I didn't know what to answer. I didn't want to surrender to easy tenderness nor hurried forgiveness, so I just said, "Take care, son." I hung up, and my heart beat strongly. Not from anger, but from something like sadness and relief mixed together. That night, I dreamed of Julian again. We were sitting in front of the ocean, and he was holding my hand. "Evelyn, don't fear the fire," he told me. "Sometimes you have to watch everything burn to understand what things don't turn to ash." I woke up with tears and a sensation of clarity. It was as if the dream had opened a door inside me. I went out to the patio and observed the stars. The trunk was still in its corner, silent, patient. I touched it and said in a low voice, "I still don't know what you hold, but I promise to be ready when the moment comes." Days passed, and the rumors grew stronger. Lauren had started appearing in local magazines, no longer as the elegant wife of the successful businessman, but as the woman who shows off while her husband faces lawsuits. The photos showed her with a tense smile, dull eyes, jewels shining more than her face. In one of those magazines, which Rose brought without malice but with curiosity, there was an interview where Lauren said, "Money is recovered. The important thing is to keep the image." I looked at her for a long time. That phrase hurt me, but not for her. It hurt me for Arthur because I understood that he hadn't married a woman, but a mirror, and mirrors, when they break, only reflect pieces. A week later, the door knocked again. It was Arthur. He came alone. His face was gaunt, his shoulders slumped. "Mom," he barely said. "Come in." He sat at the table, in the same place where years ago he asked me to teach him how to make cookies to surprise Lauren when they were newlyweds. I stood there, observing him. He was my son, yes, but also a stranger. "You don't know how much I've missed you," he said, looking at his hands. "I've spent nights without sleeping. Everything has fallen apart, Mom." I didn't answer right away. I just poured coffee and waited. "Lauren," he continued, "is no longer the same. She argues all the time. She doesn't understand what losing is." "Because she never had to," I replied without harshness. He looked up. "I know I was unfair to you, that I hurt you." His eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted you to see me as someone successful, for you to be proud of me." I sighed. "Arthur, pride isn't earned with money. It is earned with respect." The silence stretched. He took a sip of coffee. He breathed deep and murmured, "You're right. Lauren says all of this is my fault, but I think it is the fault of what I was taught to value." He looked at me with red eyes. "Forgive me, Mom." I didn't know what to say. That word, "forgive me," had taken years to arrive, and although it hurt, it also healed. "I don't know if I can do it yet," I replied honestly, "but seeing you here, looking me in the eyes, is a start." That night, when he left, I walked to the trunk and ran my hand over the lid. Something in me told me that soon, very soon, that secret kept for so many years would come to light. But first I had to close another door, the door of resentment. I looked toward the sky and thought of Julian, of everything he had left me. Not gold, nor jewels, nor wealth, but clarity. That clarity that one only gets after having lost almost everything. The following days brought worse news for Arthur. Frozen accounts, treacherous partners, and, from what I heard, Lauren missing. It was said she had withdrawn a large sum from the bank before leaving. Luxury, like lies, always has an expiration date. And it was then that something inside me woke up. An intuition, a feeling, a voice that said, "Evelyn, the moment has arrived to open the box." That night I lit a candle. The silence was profound. I knelt in front of the trunk with the key I still didn't have, but with a willing heart. I rested my hand on the lid and closed my eyes. Suddenly, I felt something under the cloth lining inside. A slit, a small, hidden compartment I had never noticed. I stuck my fingers in, and there it was, a golden key, exactly like the one in the dream. I smiled. Tears clouded my vision. "Thank you, Julian," I whispered. "You always knew when." I held the key against my chest and knew that the next sunrise would bring more than a new day. It would bring the truth. The golden key rested on my hand like a piece of sun. I couldn't stop looking at it. It was small, light, but it had a weight that wasn't metal, but meaning. For years, that trunk had been a silent presence in my house, a kind of keeper of secrets, and now, finally, it was going to reveal itself. I sat in front of it, lit a candle, and waited a few seconds. I didn't want to open it in a rush. I wanted to do it with respect, like someone touching a sacred memory. The silence was so dense I could hear my own breathing. I put the key in the padlock and turned slowly. The sound of the metal releasing ran through my skin. I lifted the lid. The air that came out smelled of old paper, of wood, of time. Inside there were yellowed envelopes, photographs, and a hardcover notebook with Julian's handwriting on the spine. "For my Evelyn, when she needs me more than ever." My hands trembled. I opened the notebook. The first pages were letters. They all began the same. "My love, if you are reading this, it is because life separated us ahead of time." I read for hours. Julian spoke to me from another time, from a love that remained alive between the lines. He told how he had foreseen that Arthur would get carried away by ambition, how he had feared that Lauren would corrupt him, and how he had decided to protect me even after his death. Evelyn, the workshop, the savings, the stocks, even the house where our son now lives, everything is in your name. I didn't want to tell you while I was alive, because I knew you would have wanted to share it all. But generosity doesn't always save. Sometimes you have to know when to close your hands so they don't take it from you. I had to stop. Tears blurred my vision. Julian, my Julian, had seen it all coming, and even so, he didn't sow revenge, but justice. At the end of the notebook, there was a shorter letter, written with darker ink, as if he had left it for that exact moment. When you feel the world has turned its back on you, open this box. Inside it, there are not just papers, but power. Not the power of money, but the power of truth. Use what is here when love no longer ties you and dignity calls you by your name. Under the notebook, I found folders organized with notary documents, property titles, and an envelope sealed with the name of a lawyer I remembered from my youth, Mr. Henderson. He still practiced, according to a handwritten note stuck on the cover. I called him the next day. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said upon receiving me in his office. "How long has it been?" When he saw me, his face transformed. "You don't age, ma'am," he joked, "but your look is the same." I handed him the papers without saying a word. He reviewed them with attention, and after a few minutes looked up with a serious expression. "Mrs. Evelyn, your late husband was a wise man. Everything you see here makes you the sole legal owner of the assets registered under the family name." I couldn't speak. I stayed staring at the wooden desk, the lawyer's hands, the shadows of the wall clock. It was too much. It wasn't just money. It was vindication. "And my son?" I asked finally. "Your son," he said, measuring his words, "is a legitimate heir, but only under your authorization. You have total control." I left the office walking slowly, with a mix of vertigo and relief. The street air hit my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power without guilt. Not because I wanted to destroy anyone, but because for the first time, destiny was returning something that had been taken from me. That night, I made tea and opened the letters again. I spoke to Julian in a low voice. "Love, if you could see me, not just for what you left, but for how you knew to protect me, even when I had already lowered my arms. I won't lie to you. It still hurts. But now at least I know I wasn't wrong to trust you." While I spoke, I remembered something he used to say when Arthur was a child. "The foundation of a house isn't seen, but it is what holds it up." And that phrase, that simple truth, resonated with a different clarity. I had been the foundation of that family, silent, invisible, firm, and although they had pushed me out, everything they believed was theirs was still supported by me. At dawn, the phone rang again. It was Arthur. His voice sounded tired, broken. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Lauren left. She took money, documents, everything." I kept silent. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a deep serenity. Justice, I understood, doesn't need applause. "Come see me," I told him gently. "Tomorrow, at 7. "Really, Mom?" "Yes, I want to talk to you." I hung up, and in that moment I knew that the true act of justice was about to begin. It wasn't punishment that moved me, but the truth. Julian had given me the power to decide, and that decision had to be born from the heart, not resentment. Before sleeping, I looked at my husband's portrait, and I promised him out loud, "Tomorrow I am not going to humiliate anyone, Julian. I am going to teach them what you taught me, that love without respect isn't love, and that humility, when it stands tall, can do more than any fortune." Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. I slept little that night, not from anxiety, but because I felt that something in the air had changed. The next sunrise found me making coffee, wearing my best blouse and setting the dining table with the same tablecloth I used on Julian's last birthday, the place where so many times we laughed as a family, the same where, tomorrow, my son would discover what it really means to ask for forgiveness. The clock marked 6:30 when I finished setting the table. There was no expensive tablecloth nor crystal goblets, just a teapot, 2 cups, and freshly baked bread. Simplicity, I understood with the years, has more dignity than all the luxury in the world. The air smelled of coffee and wood. I sat in silence and waited. I knew Arthur would arrive on time. Men who once lived on arrogance always arrive early when life brings them to their knees. At 7 sharp, I heard the engine of an old car. I peeked through the window. It was his. Nothing remained of the elegant vehicle he used to drive, nor the shine in his eyes. When he opened the door, the sound of his steps on the floor was so weak that for a moment I thought it was another man. "Good morning, Mom," he said, looking down. "Good morning, son," I replied with a serene voice. "Sit down, please." He did. I noticed his hands trembling. His face had dark circles, a grown beard, the tired gesture of someone carrying too much weight. Not the weight of work, but of guilt. I poured coffee without saying a word. For a few minutes, only the steam of the teapot and the tick-tock of the clock hanging on the wall were heard. He was the one who broke the silence. "You don't know how happy I am to see you, Mom," he said with a thread of a voice. "You have no idea everything I've been through." "Tell me," I said without tone or reproach. "Everything came down. The company, the accounts, even the house." "Lauren," he paused, breathing deep. "Lauren left me. She went with a man overseas. She emptied my accounts and left me with the debts." His words came out like a confession. "I've slept in cheap hotels, Mom. I have nowhere to go." I listened without interrupting him. Every word of his was an echo of the destiny he himself had built, and even so, my mother's heart broke a little. Not out of blind compassion, but out of love. That love that doesn't disappear even if they trample it. "And what do you plan to do now?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied with moist eyes. "But I need your help." There was a silence that lasted centuries. He looked at me, looking for hope, and I lowered my gaze toward the empty cup. It was the moment Julian had foreseen, the moment destiny had reserved for me. "Arthur," I said finally, "before talking about help, I want to tell you something." I got up and went to the living room cabinet. I took the notebook, the documents, and the envelope with Mr. Henderson's seal. I placed them in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, surprised. "Your father left you a lesson," I replied, "and inside these papers is the truth." He frowned, confused. He opened the first envelope and started reading. First, his face tensed. Then he remained motionless. The color left his face. "It can't be," he murmured. "Yes, it can. Everything you thought was yours, son, is in my name." His eyes filled with tears. "Dad?" "Your father didn't do it for revenge," I explained calmly. "He did it because he knew that one day you would need to hit rock bottom to look up again." Arthur let the papers fall on the table. "I don't understand," he said with a broken voice. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because you weren't ready, and now you are. Now it is no longer a matter of deserving. It is a matter of learning." He stood up suddenly. "So all this time I lived a lie. Everything I built wasn't mine." "No," I replied with serenity. "It was mine, but you lost it for forgetting who gave you the foundation to have it." He stayed looking at me, speechless. The silence weighed so much it could be felt in the bones. "What are you going to do with all that?" he asked finally, pointing to the documents. "What your father asked me. Do justice with love." I opened the last envelope, the one he hadn't touched yet. Inside there was a shorter letter written by Julian. "Evelyn, if this day arrives, do not punish Arthur. Teach him. Do not humiliate him. Redeem him with the truth." I handed him the letter. Arthur read it, and upon finishing, broke down crying. He covered his face with his hands. "I have been an idiot," he murmured. "A son who doesn't deserve his mother." I approached slowly and put my hand on his shoulder. "Don't say that. What you don't deserve is to keep being the same person." He looked at me with swollen eyes. "Do you forgive me?" Forgiveness, son, isn't given in words. It is demonstrated. I handed him the documents. Tomorrow we will go together to the lawyer. Not to give it back to you, but so you work with me. With you? He repeated, surprised. Yes, if you want to start over, do it from the beginning, from the bottom. Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. He lowered his gaze, trembling. Would you really do that? After everything I did to you? I nodded. Your father believed in second chances, and I do too, but this, I pointed to the papers, I won't do for you, but for what we once were. Arthur sobbed. In that moment, I didn't see the man who screamed at me in his living room, nor the son who expelled me into the rain. I saw the boy who hid behind my skirts when he was afraid of the dark. Thank you, Mom, he said finally. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Don't thank me, son. Just make it worth it. We stayed in silence for a long while, looking at the flame of the candle. The air smelled of reconciliation, of something that wasn't entirely peace, but wasn't war either. It was that middle point where wounds begin to close. Before leaving, Arthur turned and said, Do you think one day I can regain your trust? I don't know, son. Trust is like glass. When it breaks, it shines differently. It never goes back to being the same, but it can still reflect the light. He smiled through tears and left. That night, getting left alone, I opened Julian's notebook one last time. I read his first sentence. Love is measured not by what we give, but by what we keep giving, when they have already taken everything from us. And I smiled, because now I understood. I hadn't lost. I had won something that neither money nor pain could buy. My own value. Sometimes the hardest truths are served on clean plates. I knew it that night, while preparing the table with the calm of someone who knows the end of a story, but decides to tell it slowly, to savor every word. I lit the candles, arranged the silverware, and left in the center the same tablecloth Julian and I had bought on our first anniversary. The air smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. There was something solemn, almost sacred in that preparation. It wasn't a dinner, it was a trial. Arthur would arrive on time. I knew it. But what he didn't know was that he wouldn't come alone. Lauren had appeared that morning. She arrived with her expensive perfume, with a silk dress and eyes full of a fake serenity. She waited for me at the door, faking kindness. Mrs. Evelyn, I came to talk, she said with a cloying voice. Arthur called me. He says he wants us to fix things. I looked at her fixedly. She was skillful, cold, the type of woman who converts every word into a coin. Come in, I replied simply. Her heels resonated on the floor as if marking the step of an inevitable destiny. When Arthur arrived, he saw her and froze. You? He murmured. Yes, I replied. I invited both of you. It was necessary. They sat opposite each other. He with tired eyes and an empty soul. She with her head held high and a contained smile. Me, between both, like the mirror where they had to see themselves. I poured coffee. Nobody spoke for a long minute. The candles sparked and the hallway clock marked the rhythm of the silence. I didn't bring you here to argue, I began, but to close what you opened. Arthur lowered his gaze. Lauren crossed her arms. Close? She said with irony. I don't know what you're talking about, lady. About everything, I replied. About the contempt, the selfishness, about what is sown without thinking that one day it will have to be harvested. I took the documents out of the trunk and put them on the table. Lauren looked at them, bewildered. What is that? Your future, I said, looking her in the eyes. And also, your end. Arthur straightened in the chair. Mom. No. Yes, son. It is time for both of you to know the truth. I slid the notebook toward the center. Your father left this, I said calmly, and with it, the true story of what you thought was yours. Lauren took the papers with curiosity, but upon reading them, her expression changed. First disbelief, then fear, then a tense smile that tried to hide the defeat. This can't be true, she whispered. It is completely true, I replied. Everything you had, what you exhibited, what you showed off, was in my name. In your name? Repeated Arthur, as if he needed to hear it twice to believe it. Yes, and for years I kept silent, because there are battles that are won without raising your voice. Lauren got up suddenly. You cannot do this to me, she said with a haughty tone. I invested time, reputation, sacrifice. You invested appearance, I replied without raising my voice, and appearances do not generate value, only debt. I looked at her fixedly. I hold no grudge, Lauren, but I do have a memory, and in my memory, your voice still resonates. The afternoon you called me a burden in front of my son. Her mouth opened but found no words. Arthur looked at her with a mix of shame and repulsion. Is that true? He asked, barely audible. Lauren didn't answer. I leaned toward him. Son, I didn't come to destroy. I came to teach. Teach what, Mom? He asked with contained tears. That whoever despises the simple ends up losing the essential. Your father knew it. That's why he left me this. To remind you that true things, the ones that are worth it, are not bought. They are honored. Lauren sank into the chair. She was no longer the haughty woman from before. Her makeup was starting to run. And what do you plan to do, lady? She asked, defeated. Nothing that my husband hadn't planned. I opened the last envelope and showed her a legal document. Here is the final clause. Julian left it in writing. Any attempt at manipulation, falsification, or moral damage toward me would annul your access to any asset derived from the marriage. And you, Lauren, signed your sentence the day you raised your voice at me. Arthur closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. Lauren, understanding it all, got up without looking back, left through the door without saying a word, leaving behind the echo of her heels and the smell of a perfume that no longer meant anything. We were left alone, mother and son, in front of a table where finally there was only truth. Arthur took my hands. I don't know how to repair so much damage, he said. You don't have to repair it, I replied. You just have to live differently. He stayed in silence, nodding his head. And you, Mom? What will you do now? I smiled calmly. I will keep living. He frowned. Nothing else? Nothing else. Because when a woman recovers peace, she has recovered everything. Before leaving, Arthur hugged me. The hug was clumsy at first, then sincere. I felt his ragged breathing next to my neck, and for the first time in years, I knew I had recovered him. Not the arrogant son, but the child who still remembered who his mother was. When he closed the door, the silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of abandonment, but that of calm. I sat down and looked at the table. The empty cups, the candle that still burned, the stacked papers. Everything seemed to have a new meaning. Justice hadn't arrived with screams, nor with revenge. It had arrived with elegance. I blew out the candle and looked toward Julian's portrait. We did it, love, I whispered. Your plan worked, but not to punish, but to teach. And then I understood that the greatest victory wasn't having power, but knowing when to use it with compassion. They say that after a storm, the air smells different. And it is true. During the days that followed, every corner of the house seemed to breathe with me, as if it had also been waiting for that moment to start over. I never heard from Lauren again, nor did I need to. Her departure was like the wind that carries away the dust from old furniture. It leaves space for the light to enter. Arthur opened a small shop next to the house called Julian's Workshop, honoring the father he understood too late and proving that roots run deeper than mistakes. Today, at 65, I look at my home not as a place where I was humiliated, but as my silent triumph, my temple. If you take anything from this, remember, silence is not weakness, forgiveness is not surrender, and dignity, once lost, can always be reclaimed, but only if you first learn to love yourself,